As we're preparing for the next session, let me introduce to you who we have in no particular order. We have John Egerton, who is a beef farmer from Rosslea in County Fermanagh, just across the border from Clonus in County Monaghan. Dr. Siobhan Walsh from the Irish Farmers Journal, whom you will all know, and is a tillage farmer in her own right as well. We have Oliver Kiernan, who is CEO of Brandon Bioscience, and he will have some very interesting updates to bring us in relation to Seaweed. We have Thomas Ryan, who's Senior Sustainability Manager with Tirlán, and Fergal Morris is the General Manager with MSD Animal Health in Ireland. So you're all here. I'll get down to the very end, so give them a round of applause. You're welcome. And thank you to the guys for setting up so quickly. Thomas, I might just start with you because it kind of dovetails on from the last session. We're going to now look at the industry and, you know, where the solutions will lie in general as we try to meet the whole area of science and sustainability. But from a business perspective, from an industry perspective, from a dairy industry perspective, have we gone past the point of no return in terms of, you know, farmers kind of dithering on the whole issue? Is it now consumer driven and customer driven? Have you standards to meet, and if you don't meet them, you're going to lose business?
Yeah, sure, Damien. So probably sustainability is no longer an option. When we talk to customers, heretofore they would have looked at really three pillars: quality, supply chain, and then commercial, so commercial terms. The fourth and equal pillar now is sustainability. And it's not just about new business, but it's about maintaining existing business. So, and that message then filters right back from our customers back to our supply chain. So this isn't something which is here at a moment in time, but it's very much part of who we are, and within Tirlán is part of our way of working. It has to be, as we go on a journey with our 4,500 dairy farmers, our 1,500 grain farmers, to future-proof their business and our own. You know, we're now a 100% co-op owned by our members, and we have an obligation to step up to and step into the sustainability agenda to future-proof all of our businesses.
Okay, and how are you actually doing that in partnership with your suppliers? Because farmers can only do so much of the heavy lifting here. What are co-ops actually doing to try and support farmers, and as we heard about earlier on, incentivise farmers to work with you to meet those demands?
Yeah, so we've probably heard from a lot of the speakers around the level of concern that there is amongst farmers generally, and our suppliers in Tirlán are no different. And sometimes that concern is being misunderstood and misguided as being almost denial, you know, around this space. So what we've tried to do in Tirlán is define a strategy, define a journey and a destination that we're on, and we call that journey Living Proof. That's our sustainability strategy. And within that, we focused on 5 core areas of carbon reduction, regenerative agriculture, natural nutrition, working together. And you get a sense of, in the sustainability strategy development, that it's not just about what's happening on farm, but it's whole of company, whole of co-op, right from farm to fork, because that's what sustainability is about. It's not just about the farmers doing it right, but as processors, you know, we have to look at our own, what's called scope 1 and 2, our own emissions within our own processing. And within our Living Proof strategy, we're committing to, by 2030, we're going to reduce by 30% the emissions associated with our production, and similarly, reduce by 30% the emissions associated with every litre of milk we're going to produce. That's not just going to happen. So by having that strategy in place is the beginning, and then the capability. I mean, this is a really exciting space to be working in right now. I joined 2.5 years ago into a new role. Since I've been there, the people that work with me have doubled in terms of the number of people and colleagues who are working with me, hand in glove with our suppliers around the ASA water quality programme, in terms of delivering key sustainability actions on farm. And once you have the capabilities in place, then the finance is obviously the most important piece in terms of driving action. So, you know, we're delighted to be, you know, the leading co-op to step out with sustainability as part of milk price. So what we did this year was we introduced what's called a sustainability action payment. And it's an unconditional payment this year, which is recognising that it's not a new journey. To be fair to farmers generally, There's a huge amount of good work already taking place. And in year one, this is about behavioural change. It's about making sure we're all on the journey, we're all still on the train at the end of 2030. So year one is unconditional. But what we've said to our suppliers next year, they must deliver on, and the request is that they deliver on some key actions, which are basically taken from the marginal abatement cost curve, from Teagasc science. So what we've done is we've pulled the key actions from the Teagasc marginal abatement cost curve, and we've said, there's a menu of 18. You know your farms individually. You know what's unique and bespoke and what will work, and deliver on 7, and you'll continue to get that. And that's a €54 million investment over 3 years.
Okay, and I'm going to move on to the rest of the panel in a second, but I remember interviewing a farmer down the south last year, and she told me how her co-op was actually providing education for her, providing her with, you know, almost a scholarship to go and study an environmental course in, I think it was UCC. I could be wrong, and people here in the room will probably know what I'm talking about, but I don't want to be naming the co-ops because I'm not sure. But just on that, you know, you have an awful lot of your suppliers who, when they began farming, this wasn't an issue. Sustainability wasn't an issue. They were living in quota times and all of that, and probably did dairy science, and that was it in UCC or UCD or whatever like that. What about education? And maybe collaborating with some of the universities and colleges to try and give your suppliers an opportunity there to upskill from an education perspective on the environmental side of things.
Yeah, so probably this building sustainability knowledge capacity is a really important part, because for a number of suppliers, you can imagine they would have perhaps done their Green Cert, they might have done the Intercert perhaps, and as you say, when they entered farming, it was about productivity. It was about managing every blade of grass. It was about taking out the hedgerows and draining the land, which is now a mortal sin today. Okay, so we're in transition around the advisory, around the education piece. And what we've done within Tirlán is we've partnered with one of our key customers, Bailey's, and we've introduced a sustainable farming academy. And in that, we make available for the next 3 years 20 fully funded diplomas, level 7 diplomas in environment, sustainability and climate. And to give you a sense of it, we were 4 times oversubscribed, Damien, in terms of the level of interest of those and those participating. Indeed, such was the interest that a number of our suppliers said, look, we'll pay to do it anyway. So the narrative that suppliers and farmers generally aren't up for it simply isn't true.
Right.
You know, it doesn't bear out when we look at, you know, over €5 million spent drawing down the TAMS funding for the low emission slurry spreading. That's 40% funded. That means €11 million, €12 million has been spent on the less. 50% increase in lime use. I mean, when we strip it all back and we look to differentiate between the heat and the noise, the reality of what's happening on farm in front of our eyes is really, really strong and tangible in the area.
Okay, Siobhan, you work with farmers in your capacity as a journalist with the Farmers Journal, mainly tillage farmers. There's the footprint farming program there as well. So you're collaborating, you're chatting with farmers on the ground. Do they feel that the industry side, whatever about the Teagasc and advisory side, but the actual industry side of the Irish agricultural family are doing enough to try and bring them along this journey?
Yeah, I think they could do with more support, Damien, but I think in general the farmers that I deal with are extremely positive, and they're all, you know, any farm that you go out to, they're, you know, want to make a change. And our footprint farmers, I know some of them are in the audience. I saw Martin Crowe walking around there, and they're farmers who have families at home, and they say they want to leave their farm in a better way than they got it. And I know we've always said that, but I think it's changed in a way, you know, that they're more conscious of their biodiversity and their hedgerows, and they're more conscious that those things also sequester carbon as well. I suppose they could do with more supports and support from the industry. Tillage farmers that I speak to, you know, they need more support from government from a TAMS point of view, and I think that is coming from the minister now. We see more of an interest in tillage as regards to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but that's not going to come unless farmers get the support to do it, and that has to come from industry and government. You know, we have grants for bulk milk tanks, and there's no difference between having a grant for a grain trailer then, and that's basic things that farmers need. I suppose we talked about sustainability programs, and you know, there's while a lot of those sustainability programs are really good, you know, in the drinks industry, there's a certain amount of it paints a nice picture, and you know, get farmers to plant cover crops or whatever it may be. But we need research behind all of these programs as well, and we need to make sure that at the end of the day, sustainability is economics, environment and social. And if it doesn't hit all those three pillars, then farms can't be sustainable. So, you know, if we plant a cover crop, we need to know how that's going to affect our nitrogen. Are we going to be able to pass our malt and barley over the weighbridge? And will we get the premium crop at the end of it? So I think farmers just, you know, would like a little bit more thought going into some of these things as well, which is really important.
We heard in the last session there talks about possible solutions when it comes to bull beef and why that would work or wouldn't work, and the dichotomy there. But are we looking at another solution in this country which is hidden in plain sight, which is tillage farming, where the land mass has, I believe, decreased in the last 10 or 15 years, and a lot of that has been transferred to grass for feeding dairy cows. But when we look at, you know, possible solutions to energy, when we look at possible solutions, obviously, to reducing emissions and, I suppose, using more of the potential of the tillage sector. For example, sugar beet and wheat, you know, what's to say, why can't we maybe go back and encourage, you know, more farmers to go down that road? Big question I'm asking here is, has tillage kind of been forgotten about, and is it a solution to a lot of the problems in terms of us meeting targets down the road?
Yeah, we often hear that we feed 40 million people in Ireland, but we contribute to feeding 40 million people, but we also import a lot of feed to import those to feed those animals. But the reality is we can't feed ourselves in this country, and if we want to eat a balanced diet in the morning, we can't feed our population. You know, we're only about 60% self-sufficient in potatoes. We had 400 vegetable growers in 1998. We now have less than 100 vegetable growers. The vegetable area this year has decreased by 900 hectares. And as you look through those stats and you look through the crops that have decreased, you can see that whole farms have left the industry. You know, it just springs to mind, there was a broccoli, 120 acres of broccoli have left the system in Ireland this year. And that means a farmer has left the system. So, you know, we can't feed ourselves. Tillage area did decrease, Damien, by about 40,000 hectares from 15 to 18. But look, in the last few years, it remained stable. It increased by 2% the year in 2021, and this year we had the tillage incentive scheme, and it increased by 6%, so about 20,000 hectares. And there is huge potential there. We don't grow any mill and wheat in this country at the minute, and we have the seed trade. The breeders are working on varieties that are suitable to Ireland, and that all needs to be looked at. You know, we don't even mill the wheat in Ireland anymore, as far as I'm aware. You know, we have a small few artisan producers, but other than that, flour is coming in a lorry and it's being bagged. And when we had COVID, when we had snow, the things that we ran out of in the shops were flour and bread, and they're our basic staples that we need, and the same as potatoes. And I think as we go on now, those vegetable sectors, potatoes, they're farmers who are hugely reliant on energy as well. You know, keeping potatoes cold over winter, vegetables for packing. So, you know, we have to remember that those, as we go into 2023, those farmers are facing even bigger struggles than they were, and they need to be kept in business, or we can't feed ourselves.
Okay, I'll come back over to this side of the house. Fergal, I'll come to you in a moment or two. But John, you're very welcome here today. Tell us a little bit more, just for the audience. Just give us an overview of the farm back home in Rosslea. You're dry stock mainly, is that right? And you're farming with your wife and sons there. So give us an overview of your farm.
Yeah. I live in Rosslea, County Fermanagh, just on the border with Monaghan, about 3 miles from Clonus town. It's a smallish farm. We have 90 suckler cows, 260 breeding ewes, and we have a blade calf rearing enterprise where we rear about 450 calves per year. I started into farming. I was the only son. I had 5 sisters, and I was expected to take over the family farm, even though I had other ideas in my head, but I was expected to take it over. I had no control over it while my father was alive. He had notions of giving me more of a say in running the business, but He didn't do it while he was alive. He died when I was reasonably young. There was issues with the will, and for 2 years the whole farm was at a standstill. I couldn't do any improvements on the farm. Any bills I had to pay, I had to ask the bank for the money to pay those bills. That went on for 2 years. While I have 3 sons, married with 3 sons. My 3 sons were very young at the time, and it probably taught me a good life lesson that you can't manage without money, and this farming has to produce money. And sustainability financially is the biggest goal. Since then, we've made great strides to turn it into an efficient dry stock farm. No matter what they say, it is a profitable farm. My 3 sons all want to farm. Maybe it's because I'm too positive about farming, but I think farmers have always found a way of overcoming difficulties. So this farm has to be sustainable, both financially and environmentally, for my children and grandchildren, if that comes along in due course.
Well, there's one lesson anyway, and that is succession planning is a reminder to everybody to do it because of the problems that it created in your own instance. But not only do you obviously, as you say there, you got to be financially sustainable. That's key, because if you're not financially sustainable, all other sustainability falls down. But you are intent in making your farm, going that one step further and getting your ruminant business to carbon neutrality. So tell me about that journey so far and how you're getting there.
Yeah, a few years ago, a Caffrey advisor said to me that you can't be a good farmer or an intensive farmer and be good for the environment. It really stuck that in my throat, and I wasn't happy that was the case. I think all farmers, we don't set out to destroy the environment. With a bit of encouragement, we can all have a good environmental impact. So a couple of years ago, I got involved with the Arc Zero project. The seven of us involved with that, we got a little bit of funding from the EU and DERA, and we've set out on a journey to try and get our farms to carbon neutrality. We all hear this talk about net zero and zero emissions, but I think that debate needs to move on. We need to be credited for our sequestration as well as our emissions. So in that journey, we have done soil sampling on 2 occasions, and a third occasion, hopefully next week, where we have took core samples to ascertain how much carbon we are actually storing within the soil. It's a great learning curve for me, and we've done it at 10 centimetres and we've done it at 30 centimetres, and now we hope to do it at a metre deep, providing that we can get the core down far enough. We also flew a LiDAR plane over the farm, where we took a LiDAR image of the whole vegetation on the farm, trees and hedgerows, to ascertain the amount of carbon that was stored in the trees and hedgerows. On my farm, we have over 9,000 tonnes of carbon stored on the soil. And this is a benchmark.
That's your baseline.
That's the baseline, and hopefully within the next 3 or 4 years we'll be fit to go back and repeat that process and see what changes there's been made, what farming practices have done to make those changes, and be able to advise other farmers on what they can do to improve their carbon footprint.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to move on to Oliver in a second, but just on that, you're kind of, what I interpret from that is that you're saying we need to move on, that farmers should look upon being, I suppose, more environmentally aware as a means to actually being more efficient financially as well, that they're both tied into each other. Because if you have 3 sons that want to farm, you got to make it actually work financially for 4 families then. So you see this as a way of being involved in this project as not only being naturally good for the environment and improving your carbon footprint and so on, but as a means to making your business financially viable.
Yeah, like we have, as somebody else did earlier, we have been looking at all the low fruit, and we've picked a lot of the low fruit to make the farm more carbon sustainable, and that low fruit has yielded financial returns. A lot of the changes we need now, we're relying on scientists and the industry to come up with solutions. We as farmers, we're quite prepared to adopt these solutions. And it's nothing to be afraid of. Farmers sometimes are afraid of the carbon debate. They don't want to hear anybody talking about carbon or carbon.
Maybe I suppose the way it's been framed in the media as well creates this kind of pressure on farmers, which we've touched on this morning already. I'll come back to you in a minute, John. Oliver, tell us a little bit more about your business. I suppose that's just a very straight, open question, because it's quite interesting what you're involved in there, and it's an area that has intrigued us over the last 3 or 4 years. Tell us a little bit more about Brandon and what you do there.
So yeah, Brandon Bioscience is in the biostimulant industry, and we, I suppose, are responsible for the manufacture of biostimulants, predominantly from engineered marine biomolecules. As an industry, we've had to work very hard in the last number of years to get regulation introduced and provide definitions for our industry, and thankfully that has happened this year with the adoption of the new fertilizer regs. So we thankfully now have legal definition, and that's very important as we kind of move forward and continue to do the work we're doing in science and research and innovation to provide kind of backup for the claims that we are making.
Yeah.
So look, as an industry and our products, we would see ourselves very much as providing one of the many technologies that have been spoken about today. We're on that roadmap. The main issue for us as an industry is to, I suppose, when it comes to adoption of technologies, which has been spoken about a lot today, the education piece. And for us, our responsibility as an industry and as a company is to continue to invest in research, continue to invest.
So where are we in terms of research and making it, more commercial? Because seaweed has been talked about as one solution for quite a long time. You're obviously going to tell me it's not that simple.
It's not, no. And I suppose the biostimulants that we manufacture, I suppose they're not just seaweeds.
Yeah.
Seaweed is a phrase, I guess.
It's the kind of
it gets
headline,
it gets put in headlines, and it's in some instances it's seen maybe as a silver bullet, as a biostimulant, and also in the area of methane reduction. But as a company, we've worked very hard to make claims predominantly around nutrient use efficiency, specifically nitrogen use efficiency. We've worked very hard with stakeholders in industry to produce credible data and trials over a number of years that allow us then to make claims, because I came from primary production myself, spent a number of years in primary production in Central and North America and in Ireland, and it was clear the challenges that are in that industry. It's clear that we ask our primary producers to produce more food, maintain yields, and at the same time, the tools that primary producers have to produce, highly nutritious food for a growing population are ever reducing. So, for me, moving into this industry was important that with that background, I was able to understand the challenges, and then I was able to put science and research as a core strategy in our company to try and provide these solutions.
And you export, I think, 90% of your business is outside of Ireland. So give me, I suppose, a picture of your customer base then.
So I guess the predominant solution that we would provide to primary producers worldwide is for abiotic stresses. And as John and as Frank outlined this morning, abiotic stresses are ever increasing. Water has become a real issue in key growing regions in North America, are ever increasing temperatures. So our products historically have been applied to crops and plants in areas of the world where they would suffer with greater abiotic stresses, predominantly North America and Spain. Obviously, in more recent times, we're putting a lot more focus around the challenges at home, and them challenges at home aren't as much abiotic stresses. We live in a good climate, in terms of that, but we do have policy challenges around reduction in nitrates. So as a policy, we are now trying to work with stakeholders in the Irish industry to provide solutions specifically around nitrogen.
All right, just a final question before I go to Fergal. It's kind of in relation to, I suppose, the future and the role that I suppose you will actually play in all of this in the next few years at home here. How is it going to play out for you?
Look, our responsibility is to keep doing what we are doing and committed to doing, which is, this year we'll invest 15% of revenue in research, and that's right. To me that's critical, because adoption and education around technologies starts with farmers and growers believing in the technologies that you're producing. So for us, if our technologies are going to be adopted, the onus is on ourselves to continue to work closely with growers, primary producers, and the various bodies in the room here to bring these to market. And beyond that roadmap that was up there earlier on is one of the technologies to do that. Okay,
Fergal, just thanks for your patience and waiting. We leave the, I suppose, the elder statesman almost, or certainly a man that's used to taking part in these panels to the very end, because you're listening to all the different contributions this morning. But one thing that we don't maybe talk an awful lot about when we talk about solutions and the roadmap to the 25% is animal health. And does that come under the headline of technology as a way of obviously helping farms reduce their emissions?
Yeah, very much so. I think if you look at it in terms of preventing disease, it's one of the most effective ways of improving the carbon footprint of livestock production in particular. We know in the case of respiratory disease or diarrhea that if heifers get diarrhea or respiratory disease in the first 12 weeks of life, they'll lose about 500 litres in their first lactation. It has that much of an impact, up to 1,000 litres in some of the US studies. In beef animals, if you get respiratory disease, you'll have about 56 days extra to slaughter. And I think up to now, we've had access to a lot of antibiotics. So in some cases, farmers would have just treated the individual animals. But now that we've got European legislation to restrict the use of antibiotics, especially the critically important ones, farmers look more and more to vaccination. But we're still probably only at 25-30% vaccine penetration rates for diarrhea and respiratory disease. If you take the pig and poultry industry, they'd be closer to 100%. They just know they have to vaccinate to prevent those diseases. And I think there's some evidence out there, but we need more, that diseases do have an impact on increasing greenhouse gas emissions. Diseases like IPR, BVD, Salmonella, we know that individual sick animals will have 20% higher greenhouse gas emissions than healthy ones.
And again, I mean, Justin, at the end of the last session, talked about, where the cost actually falls. Is it inside or outside the farm gate? You say there in ruminant farms, monitoring technology is only being used by, a minority of farmers. Is there a cost incentive there, a kind of a long-term saving that farmers need to be convinced is actually there? Are you finding that, it is prohibitive for a lot of farmers to go down the road of adopting monitoring technology?
Monitoring technology is very interesting. I mean, from our perspective, we're a pharmaceutical company. We acquired the monitoring technology in 2019. I had some knowledge of it. We had done talks with companies in the past, but I was actually really surprised just how effective they are. They're basically Fitbits for cows. So we were the first company involved that introduced movement sensors, but we also added rumination, and that's a game changer because you can detect fertility in particular with movement, but it's much more accurate when you add rumination. And we've seen some herds, like one herd recently, quite a large one, he had 30% conception rate. He had some other health issues that were sorted out, but his conception rate this year was 60%. So it makes a huge difference because they work 24 hours per day. And I think one of the big issues on larger farms is that farmers miss a lot of heats. It's very hard to look at animals 4 or 5 times per day. Even with tail painting, you will miss animals. Whereas with the monitoring technology, they work 24 hours per day. You get a signal through to your phone, or if you've got a sort gate, they're automatically drafted out during the milking process. So there's a huge advantage there in terms of that productivity benefit. But it's the sick animals that we really see the benefit that surprises farmers, because again, they work 24 hours per day. Anything that affects rumination, milk fever, grass tetany, if there's acidosis, for example, but even conditions like respiratory disease are picked up by the monitoring technology.
Do you find that, you know, the farmers that are, you know, most focused on, you know, monitoring for health, animal health and all of that, are the same sort of farmers that are meticulous about grassland measurement and all of that stuff, that it is generally the high-end farmers that...
Definitely. In terms of penetration rates at the moment, there's probably only 10% of farmers using monitoring technology in Ireland. That's 50% in Holland or Denmark. It's 100% of farmers in Israel. And I think if you look at farmers here, we've expanded over the last number of years. That expansion has now stopped. And now farmers are looking for ways that can make their life easier. So one of the cost benefits of monitoring technology is the labour side. So it's worth probably at least a half a labour unit for the individual farmer.
Very timely, because labour shortage is a big issue. Yeah.
You remove the need for bulls. And I think it's interesting, David McWilliams even spoke about this on his podcast recently. He picked up on monitoring technology in cattle, and he made the point in high-wage economies, there's a higher adoption of technology, and we're starting to see that now. So countries like Sweden always traditionally had very high adoption of technology because of the high-wage economy. Ireland is now quite a high-wage economy. We struggle to get people to work on farms. So I think it's definitely going to help to maintain farmers in the industry for longer, because we talk about sustainability. We have the most sustainable livestock production system in the world. We have the correct temperature, the amount of water that we have deep organic soil. The one thing in my view that's not sustainable is the amount of work that farmers do. I come from a small dairy farm, and you know, nobody else works 7 days a week, 14, 16-hour days at different times of the year, whereas this definitely will help to make farmers more sustainable.
Yeah. Journalists and publicans never retire and work all the time, always switched on, well, most of the time. Siobhan, I'll get you, I suppose, maybe to put your journalistic hat on there, and you're listening to, you know, what the guys are saying here. Any observations or questions from your perspective, just on what you've heard?
I think the technologies are great, and it's great to see like companies like MSD coming with all of these great technologies. But I think as well, there's a huge amount of farmers out there where we just need to get back to basics as well. You know, only 20% of our soils are at optimum levels for pH, P and K. If we improve our pH, P and K on grassland farms, we can reduce our artificial nitrogen use dramatically. So I think that's a major thing that, you know, we have to get over some of the simpler things first of all, and they can make a big difference. You know, data from the Teagasc signpost is showing, you know, where you're grass measuring, where you have better quality grass during the summer, you can reduce your emissions by 1%. You know, getting clover into our swards, we've been going on about clover for so many years, but yet there's so many farmers who haven't got the appropriate levels in their swards yet, and that comes back to your soil again, to your pH, P and K. And in the Footprint Farmers programme, in the journal, that's what we're trying to do, get back to basics, measure and manage, and simple things like testing your slurry and knowing how much is in your slurry and what field it should go to, testing your silage. It comes back to what Fergal was saying, you know, about things that affect rumination can affect your GHG emissions. If you test your silage and work to improve your silage quality, you're going to help your emissions and help your pocket as well, most importantly. So I think very much so we have to get back to basics and start to, you know, improve things that can be really simple on farm, and small things can always make a big difference.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to the floor. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. We have the microphones, the roving mics, do we, guys? So do we have a question? We have somebody down the back there. Just introduce yourself and your question and who you'd like to direct it to. Thank you. Sorry, the mic?
Yeah.
Good.
Hi, Damien. Hi, everyone. Owen Lowry, Bank of Ireland. I suppose I'm just, I'm very interested listening to the panel here. This is the industry-focused session. I'm very conscious we've talked about sustainability for the last 4 or 5 hours, but the times we live in are extremely challenging, I would say, in terms of, you know, the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis that's in Europe at the moment, and I suppose on top of that, you know, the trade piece with Brexit, and the weaker geopolitical or economic outlook. And I suppose I'm just considering and sitting back here listening to the panel, and I suppose what I'm wondering is the challenges that lie ahead for the sector in terms of sustainability are not going to be made any way easier because of the other challenges that the sector faces. Like we've come out of 2022, or we're in 2022, we've come out of a very strong season in terms of agricultural output prices. You know, we do have input price challenges. So profitability, while it's been strong, it is at a much more, in a more risky state than it has been in the past for the entire sector. And I suppose my question really is maybe to the people on the panel who are actually at the forefront of industry and dealing with those economic challenges that we face is, will that impact, or is it on the agenda around the senior management teams that are in those respective companies, as to that challenge of meeting the sustainability piece, but also that heightened level of risk that the industry and farmers in particular will face in the future?
Well, Owen, before you finish with the mic there, can I throw the question back to you from a banking perspective? Are attitudes changing there in relation to lending for agriculture and for farming based on all of those concerns that you've outlined?
There's no doubt about it. Like the conversation that, you know, is happening that I'm having at the moment is very much around obviously sustainability and enabling the transition of the sector to become more sustainable. But we can't ignore those immediate challenges that we're faced with in the next 6 to 12 months of energy crises, geopolitical pieces, and the demand challenge for food, because as food gets more expensive, we know that the demand lightens off. So if the global economy goes into a more slowed down period of growth or recession, all those will really impact the outlook for the sector. And I suppose it impacts, the outlook banks have on the sector and the level of risk appetite. I suppose from our point of view, we know that the sector performs. We know that, you know, it is resilient through the tougher times and periods of the economy. But I think we can't ignore the challenge of leading the sustainability piece with the immediate concerns that are out there in the economy.
And Owen, are you detecting a nervousness among some of your customers that you've lent to in the agri sector?
No, I think in Ireland we are very, you know, we have a resilient sector. We are lowly geared compared to some of our international peers. If we look across our book, you know, we're very comfortable with where we are positioned within the sector. I'm very conscious of the piece that was in the media last week around Rabobank. I think it's a different sector, but at the same time, we can't ignore the challenge that lies ahead. I think what you will see is that banks will be looking more to the environmental risks that lie on farms and building those into the analysis that we will be doing, and we are already building into the analysis that we're doing on farms.
Okay, Owen, thanks very much for the question and the answer, an all-rounder there. So guys, who wants to take, yeah, Fergal.
I think one of the things, there's no doubt, there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, but there's 8 million tonnes of pork traded around the world, 10 million tonnes beef, 11 million tonnes of poultry. In 2020, China imported 4 million tonnes on their own. They imported about 3 million tonnes of beef last year from 5 years ago. And I think from a European perspective, we're 7% of the world's population, don't really matter that much anymore in terms of demand for food. The demand is coming from Asia, Africa and South America, and there will not be enough meat in the world. So the price of meat is going to continue to rise, the price of dairy prices is going to continue to rise, and people will pay for it. I think one of the things John Murray mentioned earlier was that point about the energy density or the nutrient density. If you look at it, you know, meat is very high in lysine, taurine, tryptophan, the limiting amino acids. They're 10 times more expensive to produce those synthetically, and that's going to potentially increase with energy costs at the moment. So personally, I think there's a huge opportunity for Irish livestock producers, whether it's dairy, beef, lamb, over the next 10, 20 years, because the demand is going to be there.
Yeah. Thomas, just on that, I mean, farmers are saying, thank God for commodity prices at the moment, or they'd be rightly screwed 4, 5, 6 years ago. You know, where would dairy farmers be if the input costs were up where they are now? Or maybe you know, is it a coincidence, or is there a kind of any connection between the fact that we have such high dairy prices at a time when we have such high costs?
Yeah, I think maybe back to Owen's point, and I know he's not saying about, look, maybe with the war that somehow or another there's a sides, or we can reconsider our position around environmental sustainability. Where we need to be careful of, I remember sitting with people saying, you're lucky Brexit is here, it's shadowing your responsibilities around sustainability. And then the next thing was we had COVID. And then the next thing was we had the Ukrainian war. In the intervening period, we had our climate action plan. We had Tom Arnold here leading out the Food Vision Dairy Group around, the Food Vision work group around looking at move to a health system and a health approach, a food systems approach. We have firm legislation and obligations in place at EU and at national level. There will always be other distractions, and that's not to minimise what's after happening with the Russian invasion in the Ukraine and everything else. Regardless of it, the regulatory environment continues to evolve to a point that if we're not stepping up and stepping into it, when it settles, as a country that exports so much of what we produce and we trade on our green credentials, the markets will have moved. And I think on the second point around the impact on business, for a lot of us, previous hedged positions around, you know, energy and so forth, we're beginning to come off them. So you're beginning to become much more exposed to the full vagaries of the gas and the commodity prices. And I think the positive piece says to me, if there was ever a trigger for our policymakers to finally make a move on things like anaerobic digestion, biomethane, renewable energy generation. Because up until now, Damien, you're basically saying to a farmer, plant forestry. That's the alternative sustainability option if you want to get out of livestock production and be a good farmer from an environmental perspective. Right. The suite of measures that need to be put in place, there was never more an urgency around the regulators to step up and step into that space, the policymakers, and maybe come off the podium and put in place the measures to ensure that just transition exists. So I'm hopeful around how the situation that's in front of us is driving, hopefully, the need to put in place the policy measures.
Okay, anyone else want to come in on that?
I think farmers, as farmers I speak to at the minute, are fairly terrified. You know, we have good commodity prices at the minute, but we had a tramlines event yesterday. Phelim Dolan was talking from Comex, and he said we're heading for, you know, there's pointers towards recession. Grain markets at the minute are stable, but waiting for something to either drive them down or up. And you know, I'm speaking to farmers who are spending €100,000 on fertiliser this week. And I suppose in a positive way, you know, as from what Owen was saying, they're reacting. So they've bought their fertiliser, they've bought their 4 loads of fertiliser for 100,000 grand.
Right.
But they've also sold some of their grain for 2023, because if they wait for 3 months' time, that grain might be gone down. So I think it is improving our sustainability this way in those kind of ways. It's forcing farmers to think more about the decisions that they're making.
But Siobhan, is it wrong for farmers to kind of blame what's happening in Ukraine or use it as an excuse not to comply with the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork policy, which obviously is on the table in Brussels at the moment?
When I went to Tullamore Farm first, I'm only about 2 years in the journal, but we have our farm Tullamore, and I was mad for multi-species and clover, and the lads were kind of like, oh, this one, would she go away and go back home for a while? But, you know, fertiliser prices rose. Fertiliser price, you know, nitrogen is now 850 euro a tonne. This time last year it was 400. The year before it was 200. So Sean in Tullamore now has multi-species. He has red clover. We walk the whole farm for clover distribution, and we have 90 to 100% clover on parts of our farm, and nitrogen was cut out of those parts of the farm. So I think
it's happening anyway. It's as a result, ironically enough, of the high prices.
And it's because it makes sense economically, environmentally and socially, and that's what we have to do, tick the 3 boxes.
Okay, have we any more questions? One here, yep.
Profit on your own farm?
Okay, for those that didn't hear it, who wants to know, John, you know, you talked there about the low-hanging fruit that was easy to get you started on the journey. What did you do?
Yeah, the low-hanging fruit was quite simple. It was efficiencies, genetic efficiencies. We use 100% artificial insemination, have done for a good number of years now. It's picking those best genetics to improve the breeding on our farm. We breed all our own replacements, so it's maternal genetics, the route we're going all the time, so that year on year our cows are better than the previous year and producing genetically better calves. The Leslie system for low emissions slurry spreading, we've adopted that on most of the farm now. There's clover and herbal lays, which Siobhan has mentioned. We live in a very wet part of the country. We get 1.5 meters of rain every year, and it's difficult to farm at times. Most of the multi-species have been grown in drier parts of the farm or drier parts of the country. We have introduced them to our farm, and it's difficult to manage in wet conditions. Clover and herbal lays don't like getting their feet wet, and they don't like getting tramped. But we have introduced them, and we're working on ways and means of managing that.
Yeah. And what about the higher input cost that we talked about there earlier? I mean, has that interrupted your plan at all to carbon neutrality? Does it impact?
Yeah, the higher input costs are leaving it difficult. It takes so much money now to actually keep a farm running. Even just filling the tractor with diesel, you have to think twice. Do I need to go out and do that job? And nobody's waiting on money. You get no credit anymore. Everybody wants paid for their fertilizer and their diesel up front before they'll deliver it. So it takes so much money to actually keep a farm running. But I'm always positive that we as farmers, as long as I remember, we've always had difficulties and there's always been problems, but farmers are ever the optimists, and we will find a way and means of improving the thing or dealing with the situation.
Yeah. Oliver, we chatted about this outside earlier on. We were just given a kind of a hypothetical scenario. I'm a 30-year-old farmer milking 150 cows. I've borrowed heavily to increase to that, taken over the farm from my parents. We're at this crux now in the world, which Owen touched on earlier on. So I go to somebody like yourself for advice. What advice do you have for me to try and help me maintain my business while at the same time reducing my carbon footprint?
So I think, you know, as we'll explain there, look, economic viability is at the fore of all primary producers and farmers. So the solutions and technologies that we have to provide have to be economically viable. And technologies such as nutrient use efficiency, which we have brought to market and show that we can reduce nitrogen use by 25% with the application of engineered marine biomolecules along with nitrogen source. That as a solution is an economically viable solution, and is something that can be adapted by farmers and growers immediately within their current systems. So them type of technologies, as I said, first and foremost have to be economically viable, and then in terms of their adoption on farm, they have to fit into systems. So what we have tried to do is work with companies and with products that are, for example, we've used a technology that's we can coat Priddle fertilizer. When we started our work around this range with target fertilizers, the main source of nitrogen at the time was CAN, and we developed a technology along with them that they were able to go to farmers, like that you give example of there, and give them the option to reduce their nitrogen use by 25%.
Okay. All right, any more questions I can see of? Raise your hand. Yeah. Back.
This morning has been fantastic. Really, really great. A lot of positive things coming through. But I'm probably more confused than ever before. I've had the best year as a farmer ever, and that's over half a century. And yet I'm more confused as to the future. I don't believe we'll make our 25% by 2030, and I'm a very positive person, but we will not. The science is in silos. The technology is definitely there. We've got an extraordinary amount of terrific initiatives going, great leadership, as epitomized by your panel. But we have to pull it together in some way. And I hate coming back to this thing that I dealt with earlier this morning. But unless we kidnap John Roach and keep him here and have that kind of massive, bigger, larger-than-life central thing to hang this all on, we're not going to make it. And yet, then we're going to be in more despair than ever before. So how do we get back to Frank O'Mara's early adopters? How do we shift them to the general consensus? And, how do we pull it together is really confusing me. And I want to be very positive, but I am very concerned. And I just want to put that to the panel as to, like I'm doing what John is doing with regard on our farms. Yet we have to reduce because of our yield per cow, and I don't hate personalising it, but it's probably helpful for this audience to hear it. Because of our yield per cow and because of our nitrate level, doing things right, we're going to have to reduce by 50 cows on our farm. So I'm going to have to go out and lease more land to dilute that 50 cows so that's inefficient. So I think really we need to grab hold of the reality. We have to do something more realistic. Fergal talked about animal health. I reckon there's 3 or 4% more in animal health. Yet when we had an animal health initiative a few years ago, it was very, very slow. Slower to deliver than we'd like because we're slow to adopt. How do we accelerate adoption? That's the reality.
So, Mike, are you saying there's a lack of joined-up thinking? And I've spoken to farmers who say when they're trying maybe to do the right thing by one part of their business, it's creating a conflict with some other policy that's coming from somewhere else. Is that kind of what you're getting at there, that there's a lot of confusion and conflicting sort of policies and research, that if you try to adopt them all, you'll be cancelling each other out?
Yeah, exactly. Well, most adoption will cost you money. And it was dealt earlier in Justin's session. How do you monetize Origin Green, for example? How does that mean something meaningful in product price terms for the farmer? Niall Brown talked about the market doesn't want the bull beef, yet the economics tell us it's the way to produce it. How do we pull all these pieces together? We know that age at slaughter is too high on average, and we have a huge gain by reducing that, but where's the initiative to reduce it? We know empty cows are a problem. We know age at first calving is a problem, yet we're not dealing with them. And until we confront the issues in a meaningful way, we're going to continue to have this confusion and lack of delivery. Back to the point made earlier, if we don't by 2030 make the 25%, is there a legal responsibility going to come back to the industry, a la the Dutch situation? That will be even far more embarrassing nationally from a point of view of food production. And I hate to be doomy and gloomy. It's not my style.
No, it's not.
But at the same time, this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, okay, it's a very interesting observation, which, do you want to pick up on that, Fergal?
Yeah, I think I was at a meeting a few years ago, and Theo Lamb is he's a very well-known vet in Holland, and he was here and he learned about Animal Health Ireland, and he was blown away by the collaboration that you had milk processors, the Department of Agriculture funding a project that was for the good of the industry, and you had a lot of people that gave their time for free for the good of the industry, and he said this wouldn't happen in most countries, and it's been extremely successful. We're close to eradicating BVD. We'll start an IBR eradication program. There's great programs there to improve calf health. We've reduced nationally our somatic cell count. So a model like that, the technical working group, the implementation group, with the industry stakeholders, to me would make a lot of sense. It looks like a great model.
Okay. Any more questions? Anybody else? Down the back, yeah. Okay. Yep.
Hi, James Maloney, Enterprise Ireland. Yeah, really interesting information today. I just have a couple of questions, maybe as I listen through today. Would anyone be able to tell me what is the potential as we farm at the minute of sequestering carbon? How many tons of carbon can Ireland actually hold? Or can we get agreement on that? Carbon credits is a bit like cryptocurrency to me. I don't really get it. I see some new technologies coming through, and I think we have to kind of get consensus on where this is going to go as an industry before we can actually move on it. In terms of our food industry to grow, in new entrants coming in, probably just to Thomas, Is there an assessment criteria on taking on new farms or an impact on it? Or is just if I'm 1st of September or 1st of October, I decide that I want to milk 100 cows on my tillage farm, or what is the protocol for that? Or would it be an opportunity for maybe to bring some farmers into more of the technology that's available there, or the wearable devices, or is there any assessment criteria on bringing new farmers in and setting the benchmark from there?
Just on the carbon credits, Siobhan, there is a lot of confusion there about what it means and who takes ownership of sequestration and all that. Where are we on that?
The more you read, the more confused you get. But as I understand it at the minute, the government accounts for our carbon sequestration in the national inventory, and you can't account for a carbon credit twice. So at the minute, the government owns our carbon credits, and look, there's loads of things to be worked out on that, and there's people, you know, the John Harrigan in Limerick is you know, looking into the legalities of that. At the end of the day, farmers own their land and they own the carbon that's in their land. So I think that is yet to be worked out. I don't, you know, there's more to come on that. James asked about the levels of carbon in soil. We're in the process of testing 900 hectares as part of the Footprint Farmers programme, and the carbon levels on that land is varying from 21 tonnes of carbon per hectare up to 320 tonnes of carbon per hectare. Interestingly, that highest figure is on a fairly intensive dairy farm. You know, so now soil type management all comes in there, but the animals are helping to increase the carbon. And then the low figure is on a livestock farm. It's on Tullamore Farm actually, but it's a farm that was previously in tillage. And I think there's huge scope there on tillage farms to increase carbon sequestration through the use of cover crops and through the use of straw incorporation, which hasn't been done on a large scale up to now. So you can see the variations there, Damien. That's only in the top 30 centimetres of the soil. But we've so much to learn on carbon. Like when we were testing for carbon, we used the Chagas guidance, so 4 hectares down to 30 centimetres. But we need guidelines there on how to do this and what we can do with that then. So we're going to test in another 3 years and see what we've offset, like John is doing on his farm. But I think the more we get into carbon, the more complicated it gets. And you know, I hope like trade in carbon would be good. We definitely need to be recognised for storing that carbon. But as we get into trade in carbon, do we lose carbon? You know, if we lose carbon, what happens as well? And I think government are testing for carbon now under that soil sampling scheme, and they're only testing to the 10 centimetres. So we need a bit of a reality check there as well. Like the UN is saying, you have to test to 30 centimetres at least. So we're starting off on the wrong foot there as well.
Okay. Thomas, I only kind of heard James' second question there just with the sound, but maybe this is kind of the area he was asking about. Are you open for business? I mean, you're new. Congratulations, Tirlán, launched last week. Are you open for business? Or when you look at, you know, as Mike referred to earlier, you know, our legal obligations with regards to climate, is there any sort of talk in the industry now about stabilising production, or are we just driving on? I mean, is there an aim? Have you been at events where by 2030 we're going to go from 8.5 billion to 12 billion? Is there a roadmap there, or are we looking at stabilising numbers? What's your advice to a tillage farmer who wants to go dairying, looking at the 60 cent, knocks on your door in your new office there in Kilkenny and says, I want to go milking cows, will you buy my milk from me?
Sure.
Has the attitude changed now in that regard from 5-6 years ago?
Yeah. The door is open. It's the first thing to say to you. Because dairying is a really good enterprise, a really good sector to be part of and be involved in.
But are we paying lip service then to the whole environmental question by saying that?
No, but if I finish it off, okay? So our door is open, and why wouldn't you be part of dairying? You know, we spoke earlier about, you know, the hectares that were lost, you know, from tillage to dairy. Farmers are rightly going to make the most economically appropriate decisions for themselves. And it's not by accident that has evolved. However, to James's point, I mean, we have a milk purchasing policy agreement in place with all our suppliers, conditions of supply around which things like compulsory compliance with ESDAS and other measures, and what you're going to see more and more is the conditionality around which we engage is very much going to reflect new agenda of getting the balance right. I think in an early iteration of Tom Arnold's work, he spoke about food vision, or about food-wise and food vision being an economic success, And we're in an era now where the balance, getting that fulcrum right between the environmental and the economic. So that's what the future looks like for new entrants who are going to come in, to make sure I have my adequate slurry storage in place, to make sure that the basic measures that are fundamental requirements of being a dairy farmer are being ticked. But Tirlán, the door is open when they come.
So it's business as usual?
No, you didn't hear that, Damien. To be fair now, you didn't hear that from me. There are requirements and obligations that have to be met. And with all due respect, once the legal requirements are met, once they're prepared to participate in the environmental programs run by the state and by ourselves, things like our €54 million sustainability action payment I referred to before, we're not going to stand in the way of a farmer who's prepared to do the right thing from developing their farm enterprise. Justin McCarthy at the end of the last session used a word which I think has been used quite a lot during the day: collaboration. We within Tirlán are not going to be able to do this on our own, right? I mean, I look at this and I call out the specific partnership we have with Teagasc around the Signpost Future Farm programme, and I see Shane Fitzgerald and others here who have the stone in the shoe and who are advocating not just for their own farm. Shane is one of the Future Farm participants. So he's not just advocating for his own farm, around all the good actions he's taking, but he's a pillar in his community that others are leaning into. And we're going to continue to use this extension of peer knowledge, of peer-to-peer. I think that someone called it before, not knowledge transfer, but knowledge exchange. The future is very different on the basis of if we just rely on the old models of previous. And maybe to give Mike McGann a bit of hope, we did hear from earlier sessions that at least a third of the journey can be achieved by doing the basics right. Siobhan said to us 20% of our soils are only at optimum soil fertility. That means a lot of us and not enough of us are doing the fundamentals right.
So we're not looking at the reintroduction of quasi-quotas in the short to medium term?
But Damien,
to curb production.
Damien, there's been quotas here in Ireland since 2006 when the nitrates came in. Every farmer has to have adequate land base. They have to have adequate slurry storage in place.
But if we lose our derogation status, which you mentioned earlier on, which is under threat as well, does that not create a situation where we need to relook at growth until we find solutions?
The growth that we've seen since 2015 isn't an indication of the future. The pent-up demand that existed in the sector. I mean, in effect, there were, dairy farmers were handcuffed since 1984, right? So that pent-up demand that we would have seen, has been broadly delivered on. So we're going to see a big drive, I think, over the next period of time around. We're back to the productivity. We're back to getting better performance, and I think it's back to the animal health discussion. It's back to herd health performance, because we can't. The day of just relying on, more numbers delivering output, that's not the reality of the future. Efficiency is going to be very much.
We're just careful not to drive farmers into a situation where they're the front line, kind of going to take the hit by. But
Damien, they're our shareholder. We're their co-op, so we're in this together.
Right.
We're in this together. We're 100% owned by our suppliers, so very much this is a shared journey that as a co-op, as Tirlán, we're saying we're putting significant money to help future-proof their business.
Okay.
Because fundamentally, if it's right for them, it's right for us as their co-op.
Okay, I'll take one more question if there is one, and if not, okay, we have one more down the back, and then we can smell the spuds.
Neil Keane, Alltech. Netherlands is referenced there earlier. It's probably a country as ag scientists we look to as a benchmark in terms of mentioned collaboration, best practice in science, research, adoption of technology. There's a polarised position between the farmers and governments. I think the Ag Minister resigned yesterday. That might help. But how does the panel feel Ireland Inc. is positioned to not be in a similar situation as as Dutch Agri finds itself in today?
Okay, all right, and the image of the sector as well comes into to play there. So thanks for that, Neil. That's maybe, I suppose, a question for all of you, and a kind of if you want to roll it up into a take-home message from today as well. I'll start down the end there with Siobhan.
I think we need to put a plan in place. We don't have a proper plan in place to meet those targets in a minute. You know, it's kind of, as Mike said, we know all the things that are there, but we have to pull them all together. And, you know, we have had climatised there since December 2020, but that hasn't really been, we haven't seen great strides taken in that. You know, there's an aim in that for protected urea to be, to take over all urea use by the end of 2023, but, you know, urea is still only 16% of nitrogen use total. It increased, I think, by 50% in use this year, but it's still very small as part of urea use. So that acclimatise, if we implemented that and had been implementing that since December 2020, we'd already be some of the way there. You know, and things, you know, we can't forget about wash quality and all those things. Are not, if we implement nitrates and, you know, I suppose enforce those rules more, that people are spreading slurry at the right time. But look, but to wrap up my message, Damien, I think it's back to getting those simple things right. Okay. Thomas touched on the soil again. You know, we can't underestimate the big changes, the big difference small changes can make.
Okay.
Yeah, personally, I feel very strongly, as a country that suffered severe famines in the 1700s and 1800s, that, you know, you look at countries in Europe cutting, the Dutch, one of the second biggest exporter of agricultural produce, cutting their meat production by 50%. It's a choice. Germans are doing something similar. Belgium are doing something similar. Canada have come out and said they're going to cut their fertilizer use by 30%. They're condemning millions of people to starvation. That's what this means. That's the consequence. And we're going to see this in the next 12 months, 2 years. Personally, we have a responsibility to produce food. And yes, it's very high value food, but that nutrient density as well. I think over time people realise, you know, humans have evolved to eat meat. A vegan diet has issues in terms of, there's a lot of issues. You need amino acids in your diet. Right. It's something that we've evolved over time to do. And a lot of the fake meat companies will have to start adding the likes of lysine, taurine, tryptophan, which are a huge cost. And they'll find and see that meat production is probably one of the most efficient ways to do it. That's...
Okay, Thomas.
Yeah, I think I'm proud to be part of the agri-food sector. I think it's a really good and important time where the changes we're seeing now are significant, to put it mildly. I think we have the bones of a really good strategy in place. I'm looking with interest at the 13th of October. I see Minister McGonlogue has called a Sustainability Summit in Dublin Castle, where hopefully we'll begin to see the merging of some of the recommendations that are coming from the various groups, from the various food vision, dairy and the livestock groups. Because the one thing at farm level farmers are rightly looking for is that certainty of guidance around that policy piece. I think there's loads of capability. Go back to the capability piece, whether it's in this room or outside of this room, around the enabling people to be able to deliver against it.
Okay.
The finance, I would say to you, as a sector, in terms of the sustainability challenges that are in front of us, the state has not adequately contributed to meet the challenge. Not specifically on whether that's research, whether that's renewables. I think as industry, we have a role to play, but I think that piece is a key piece around ensuring we have success.
Oliver?
Yeah, I think in relation to Ireland Inc. and the sustainability challenge we face, I think to steal a phrase from Justin, you know, in terms of collaboration and communication, I think that's critical going forward. And like I don't believe that we can solve our problems with the same thinking that we've used to create them. So us as, you know, industry leaders and proud, you know, participants in the agri-industry, look, we need to continue to collaborate, to work together, and you know, solutions that, as I repeat myself, that we bring to market have to be economically viable and have to be something that can be adopted in the short term, you know, if we're going to meet the targets that are for us.
All right, and John Egerton, the last word to you.
Yeah, I'm very positive about the future. The world needs fed, and we're very good at feeding people. And just one wee thing back to the carbon, I have 72 hectares, and I am storing over 9,000 tonnes of carbon on my soil, so you can do the maths. But I think we farmers, we're the custodians of the carbon, and I think that's what needs to be put out there. We're not the bad guys in this. we're looking after the country's carbon and we need to be rewarded for that.
Right, and get some credit for it, is
Yeah.
what you're saying. All right, well, thank you all very much indeed for your input. Thanks to the audience as well for the questions, and we look forward to the rest of the conference after lunch. So, round of applause for our panel, and we look forward to asking you. So, if you make your way